Hi everyone, I'm Shelly from There's No Place Like Home at redheadmom8.wordpress.com. I've got a question for you. Are you homeschooling? Then you need to stop worrying about school timelines. As someone who is always out there encouraging people to homeschool their children if they haven't already started or if they haven't already started thinking about it, one question that I often get asked, whether it is by a prospective homeschooling parent or somebody who's already doing it, is what if my kids aren't doing things when they're supposed to be? So for example, what if my kids aren't reading when they're supposed to be? What if they're not writing when they're supposed to be? What if they're not sounding out their letters when they're supposed to be? And so my question to those people is often, well, who says? Who says that they are supposed to be doing things on that schedule? And the answer is usually that the schools in the area or the schools across the country, they do follow a typical timeline. And there's a reason for that. Kids who are in school have to learn things in a way that is conducive for the environment that they're learning in. So schools will usually have a textbook approach to learning, if we're talking about traditional schools and not like alternative schools, because I know there are some of those right now that are like charter schools. But the traditional school setting is mainly textbook driven. And on top of that, a lot of teachers have like 30 kids in their classrooms, and unfortunately sometimes even more than that. So when it comes to that, yeah, that really does play into the fact that they do have to have their kids learning at least in a similar fashion so that they are able to use the textbooks that they are using to be able to approach things, because they just don't have the time nor the manpower to be sitting down and individually, let the kids work on their own timeline. But here's the thing. First of all, let me just say this. If you think that there's a very good chance that your kids will someday go back to school, if you're only homeschooling them temporarily and you do plan on putting them soon back into the school system, then yes, then you might want to pay more attention to what the schools around you are doing, just so that when your child does go back in, that they aren't completely lost. Now, I have to add in there that I really caution against putting your kids back into school, just if you look at the environment in all areas right now, but that is that's another video entirely, but I had to say it. So anyway, but for the rest of you who do plan on homeschooling their kids, at least for a while, or maybe even through graduation, or maybe you're just confident that this is what you're going to be doing. If you are worrying about school timelines, you are not reaping the benefits of homeschooling. So I just mentioned, that the reasoning behind the school timelines, that doesn't fall to your child though when they are at home. When your kids are at home, they do have the advantage of learning when they are ready to. Whether they learn how to read when they're 4 or whether they learn how to read when they're 8, it makes no difference in a homeschool. What matters is that they are reading. The same thing goes with writing. Whether they start writing on their own at 5 or whether they start writing on their own at 7 or 8, sometimes even 9. Again, as long as they do learn how to do it. And that's one thing that I think way too many parents don't think about. We're always comparing ourselves to other people, whether to our neighbors or to our relatives, or just from your own memories of school of when you did certain things, because a lot of times those memories do stick with us. We remember when we learned how to do certain things. Like I remember that I learned my times tables in 4th grade. So it's just one of those things that as a parent, you do remember those things if you went to school. But honestly, your kids are individuals. They are not cookie cutter images of one another, and they don't have to be. And I just want to give you an analogy, okay? So first of all, we have all of these school timelines, and they tell you that your child should be reading at this age, and they should be writing at this age, and they should be tying their shoes at this age. They should be writing their letters at this age, and it just goes on and on and on and on. And it can be overwhelming and stressful if your child is not where they're supposed to be. And it reminds me of those growth charts that your pediatrician has. When they're weighing your children or measuring how tall they are, they will often tell you like what percentile your kids are in. And if they're in the 90th percentile, that means that they're like taller than or heavier than 90% of other kids their age. If they're in the 10th percentile, it means that they're small and that they are smaller than like 90% of the kids that are their age. But the thing is that what you need to remember is that kids all have their own normal. They don't, this is what they're basing that growth chart on, is the average, what the average child weighs, how long or how tall the average child is. So even as like society changes, you know, I know that they say a lot of things now about childhood obesity, and there are a lot of obese children. And so, yeah, so as children are becoming heavier, that is going to move the percentile up when it comes to those growth charts. Yet as a parent, when you're looking at these growth charts, if the doctor tells you, you know, that your kids are in the 10th percentile, that can be really scary, especially for a first-time parent. You think, what am I doing wrong? What's wrong with my child? Whereas on the other hand, if your kids are in the 90th percentile, you're happy. Oh, I'm feeding them good. They're growing good. But it just goes the same way with the timeline, with the school timeline, with the learning timeline. Kids develop not only physically, but mentally in their own timeline. And we need to keep that in mind. Now, I had a few kids who were like in the -5th and -10th percentile for their weight. And usually they were pretty low for their length. Now I say length because I'm referring to like when they were babies, but you know, they were pretty short for their age too. And so one of my sons in particular, he's the one that's 20 now, he was very, very small. And as a mother, instinctively, I knew that he was fine. I also knew that as a child, I was very small. I was like 27 pounds when I was in kindergarten. I was also really small. But his doctor really was concerned with the fact that he was so small. And so we spent years taking him to all sorts of specialists. We took him to a GI doctor. We ended up taking him to an endocrinologist. And she ended up sending him like to Philadelphia for testing. She talked to me about growth hormones. And after all is said and done, after years of them worrying that my son wasn't where he should be, she finally realized after all this testing that my son was just a late bloomer. And now the clinical term for that was constitutional delay. But what it means is late bloomer. And she said to me, hey, if you want to give your son growth hormones, to which I immediately said, no, we're not going to do that. But she said, otherwise it just means that your son is going to hit his growth spurt between the ages of 17 and 19. So pretty much later than other boys his age. And you know, she was right. So I remember at 16 years old, he was maybe about 4'11", maybe 5 feet tall. Before he went to school, because he went to school for a couple years in middle school, and before he went to school, he also went for a couple years in elementary school too. He wasn't really that self-conscious about it when he was at home. It was when he started being around other kids that he started noticing how different he was from the other kids. And that is what I am imagining is happening with these kids who are in school and are having these learning differences and are learning on a different timeline, and they notice that they're not the same as other kids. That is what was happening with my son with his growth. So at one point, my endocrinologist, when I did pull him out again and I started homeschooling him again, and I had the discussion with her, and she said to me that she thought it was a really good idea that I was homeschooling him because of his situation. And I look on that as children with learning differences. They can thrive when they are at home, because not only are they free from judgment, hopefully, but they are able to just continue to grow on a path that God set out before them and not the school system. So what happened to my son, you might be wondering? Well, he's 20 years old now, and he is the tallest one out of all of my kids. And I have 4 adult kids, so it's not like, you know, I'm comparing him to 10-year-olds. I have 4 adult children, and he is taller than everyone other than my husband, who's 5'11", and my son is still growing. As a matter of fact, he was here last month. He was a little bit shorter than his older brother. They were just here again over the weekend. He is now a little bit taller than his brother. So he is doing things at a later time, but he is still doing them. And the same thing happens when it comes to academic learning. And I will say that, yes, as a mother, instinctively, I knew that there was nothing wrong with him. And I'm seeing the same pattern actually with my two boys now, who are almost 12 and one just turned 13. And they are also very small. And when I had one of them at the doctor a couple years ago, she wanted me to take him to a specialist. And I didn't, because I know there's nothing wrong with him. I saw the same thing happen to my son. We went through years of worry, constantly thinking that there was something wrong with him. And there was nothing wrong with him. He just needed time. And that is what we need to remember when it comes to our children, when it comes to whether they're reading or whether they're writing. As a parent, if there really, really is something with your child and that they need intervention, you'll know. But what I am going to tell you is that if, as a homeschooling parent, you are constantly comparing yourself to what other kids who are in school are doing right now, I just want to say, stop it. Stop. Homeschooling doesn't have to be anything at all like school, and that goes for those timelines too. That's all that I have for you today. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed yet and would like to hear more of what I have to say, I would love if you would do that. If you have any questions or comments, you can leave them over on Instagram, because YouTube always disables my comments. And if you like my work and would like to check out my Patreon page, I will leave a link in the description box for that as well. And I hope you have a great day.